Welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast with Mukunda.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Mirror Media Podcast and maybe Brown Pundits. I haven't decided yet, but we'll find out soon. Today we have our guest, Ami Ganatra, who is an author. She wrote this amazing book. I have it on Kindle. I wish I had the hard copy, but I don't, sadly. There you go. Well, when you do that there we go. Mahabharata Unraveled, Lesser Known Facets of, uh, of, of
Well-known history.
yeah, it's an amazing book. So I really do enjoy it because if you guys have followed me, I'm obsessed with Mahabharata, and any new book that comes out, I tend to have a very harsh kind of critique of it if I do. And I really did enjoy Ami's book. So Ami, thank you for joining the podcast. Welcome, namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much, Mukund, for having me. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. We always want to have great guests who have produced, wonderful works of either scholarship or general knowledge or something that addresses the issues within, the larger dharmic world, or Indic world. This is one of the difficulties a lot of times with talking about India and Hinduism and Dharma is just they're so intertwined. It's so difficult to parse one thread out without touching on all the other threads, right? So this is also the problem that India is having today, which is when you talk about India, what are you talking about? It's a very complex quagmire. But yeah, can you tell us something about your background, Ami? How did you? I'm sure your career didn't start off wanting to write the book. You probably did a few other things before. So what is your journey to get to where you got to?
Um, uh, I spent some time in US, and anytime somebody sees an Indian, they'd be like, "Oh, are you IT?" Yeah. So I mean, I wouldn't deny I am also an engineer, into computer science engineer. That's how it started. After that, I did my MBA and then moved to consulting. So that's my background, my professional background. Currently, I work for a consulting firm, and my clients now are more NGOs. So I moved from for-profit to NGO consulting.
Right.
Yeah, so clearly didn't start off wanting to write a book and a book on Ramayana, so to say, on Mahabharata, so to say. So no, that's not what I thought. Um, I think 2009 I had a back injury because of which I got back to yoga.
Yeah.
I used to do it as a kid. I got back to yoga, but this time it was different. This time I wanted to know more about what it is. So that led me to Patanjali Yoga Sutra, then Gita, and then wanting to learn Sanskrit because I realized that without really knowing Sanskrit, it's very difficult to understand the texts for what they are. Yeah,
Right.
English is not always a great language to understand Indic scripture. Uh, so that's how the move to Sanskrit happened, and I was living in Hong Kong at that time. I had a lot of time, so thankfully I could read a lot of this and study a lot of this. 2016, 2017, I started reading the Mahabharata. So Vyas Rachit Mahabharata. I took the Gita Press version because I didn't want to read the English. So this is English, Sanskrit, and Hindi.
Is this the Dutt?
The Gita Press version.
Is that the one by Dutt? Or is it Hindi, Hindi Sanskrit, not Hindi English?
Hindi Sanskrit, Sanskrit
Yeah.
Hindi. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So what happened was, I mean, anytime the topic of Mahabharata comes up, people get the discussions become very heated. People have passionate discussions because they have passionate likings towards the character. We've become one of those characters. So the discussions used to go on, and that's when I picked up because I was like, I really need to know what Vyasji has to say, because on one hand, they'll show Draupadi as, this woman who's always angry, wanting revenge. On other hand, they'll call her one of the Panchasatis, Panchakanyas. On one hand, Dharmaraj, Yudhishthir is called Dharmaraj. On other hand, you're like, oh my God, he's just gambling away his wife. So where does truth lie? Were our ancestors so confused that they really didn't know what adjectives to use for people? Or is it telling us that there is really no right or wrong? It's all just black and gray and all of that. So I had these questions, and hence I wanted to find the answers for myself. That's how the reading of Mahabharata started.
Right.
The writing of the book was a serendipitous was a serendipity, let's say, because what happened was last year, thanks to Corona, the lockdown happened, and in India, I was back in India. I relocated back home to India, and they were playing Mahabharata Ramayana, the old Mahabharata Ramayana
Yeah.
series. I don't know if you're aware. When we were
Of
kids, they
course, every day see anywhere in the universe is aware of that series. Yeah.
So they started playing it again, and I would put up Facebook posts saying that, this is not how it was. The
Yeah.
character is not how it is, and this is how it is, and this is what you really learn from this situation. So Bloomsbury, Praveen Tiwari of Bloomsbury, he used to follow me and follow my post, and he's like, this is fascinating. There's so much written about the Mahabharata, but nobody really knows what is in the Mahabharata. Everybody has a retelling. They take a character, they weave stories around it. So why don't you do something which is based on the Mahabharata?
Yeah.
So, and then the book happened. Yeah. So it was literally thanks to Corona, thanks to China. Yeah.
Well, that's really fascinating because it's like, so did you growing up, did you have any connection to the Mahabharata, or even like outside of the general things you're just taught, like part of being Indian and within the Indian context, did you have any special connection to these characters or these or I mean, I use the word mythology, but I don't mean mythology here. I don't mean in the way that we talk about mythology. I mean more of the ancient Greek words, mythos, right? Where it is a living, breathing like story and part of one's existence, right? It doesn't mean it's true or false. That's secondary to any of this. So did this mythology in that sense did, did you grow up with it, and what was your relationship with it growing up?
I think Mahabharata Ramayana, of course, because these are stories which are told to you by your grandparents, by your parents. Yeah, they some you always know these stories, even if you don't actively process it that way, but these stories are always coming to you. In my case, though, I think I give a special credit to my mother for this because, uh, typically while growing up, parents expose their kids, especially if the kid is in an English medium school, it'll only be English books because at school they'll tell you, oh, you should read English. But my mom was always very particular. She said that, come what may, my child has to be proficient in Hindi, Marathi, because I grew up in Mumbai, and Gujarati. That's my mother tongue. So along with English, we always had these books, and these books were not usual novels or anything. They were all
Hmm.
Gita Press books. So like the Gita Press Mahabharata that I read, Gita Press has a whole series for children, so children literature, and these would have stories from the Itihas. It would have stories from history, like Veer Balak, Veer Balikai, and Veer characters. So all these characters you would read. So that's how one there was a connection with the language, so to say,
Hmm.
because many times English loses on the essence of what is being conveyed. Yeah. So
Right.
that connection to the language was always there. Hence, when I started reading Mahabharata again and I had to I shifted to Hindi English, Hindi Sanskrit. It was not very difficult for me, and the connection with the stories was there. So I think that was a part of growing up, and the credit fully goes to my mom for ensuring that we had exposure to four languages, to books in four languages
Right.
at home, and it
Well,
helped that I like to read.
absolutely. I mean, but even within Hindi and Sanskrit, there's a gap, right? Like even the word dharma in Hindi means very something different than dharma in Sanskrit, right? Like Hindi,
Yes.
it's much more focused on religion or idea or like a fixed kind of like setting. Where dharma in Sanskrit is like this weaving context specific like set of moral values and ethics
Yeah.
and laws, and it's everything, right? It's everything and yet nothing, and it's difficult to pin it until you have to get it into context, right? Whether you read it in a Dharma Shastra, what Dharma means
Yeah.
in Dharma Shastra is different from what Dharma means in Mahabharata, what Dharma means in like Vedanta, right? Like each of the times you use that word, it means something slightly different. But so even going from Hindi to Sanskrit, they must have been. I mean, parts of it must have been a little difficult to get your mind around in the beginning.
I would say, so specifically talking about dharma in Hindi or Gujarati or Marathi also means the Sanskrit dharma. It's just
Yeah,
that we have narrowed its
sure.
context. We have narrowed its meaning, so to say, because I think that the reason is not so much Hindi. The reason is English, because we always translate dharma into religion,
Sure.
and then religion is translated back into dharma, which then makes the understanding very narrow. Now, even so in Sanskrit, what does dharma mean? Dharma means dharayati iti dharma. Dharanat dharma itiyahu. So the root word comes from dhru. The dhru root word is also the root word which is used for dharti.
Yeah.
Dharti is earth.
Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does the earth do? It sustains, it upholds. Yeah. So dharayati, one that upholds, one that sustains. The
Mhm.
principle of sustenance that we call sustainability. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything that sustains a society, allowing the individuals and the units in the society to survive, thrive, and grow, that is called dharma. Okay. Now that this dharma is a very large context.
Mhm.
It has a very broad meaning. For dharma to be lived, you need certain structures. Yeah, you need to have law, you need to have understanding of justice, you need to have what is in what we call religion, so to say, which is basically a belief system. But
Mhm.
it doesn't have to necessarily be uniform, it could change from unit to unit. Yeah, so all these things come together to define the sustainability principle, that is dharma. That same meaning of dharma is in Hindi or any other language. I think we inherently understand this in
Huh.
Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati. But when we make it religion, then it becomes a little different. Yeah. And now our understanding comes more from religion, which is more about Bhagwan hai, there's God, there has to be certain way of worshipping and things like
Yeah.
that, right? Whereas that is just a very, very small part of the understanding of dharma. And I think understanding of Sanskrit broadened my perspective a lot more in that
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah. Absolutely. Just in the context, I find so Dharma is obviously such a it's both such a vast topic, but also it can be a very meandering topic, right? Because you can kind of just like move slowly through it and
Yeah.
fixate on it. I do think it's one of those ideas within the Hindu framework initially that is much more universal than people give context to it or sense about it, right? Because it really does look at trying to explain phenomenon within the Hindu universe, but also outside of what we would call the Hindu universe, right? Like for me, the Hindu universe is the universe, but still, like when you talk about like there's like the Catholic
Yeah.
universe or the quote unquote secular universe, the ideas of Dharma can explain many things in each universe, right? But this, especially on this concept of Dhariti Dharma, right? The sustenance of things, of
Correct.
how are things sustained, what structures do you need, how do structures negotiate with people, with values, with like trying to achieve goals, right? It's such a complex thing, which is why Bhishma also says dharma sukshama, right? It's subtle, it's very difficult, it's very difficult to
Correct.
understand and find. And that's like kind of like, so you're part of this train of so of writers, especially recently, I think, like someone like Guru Charan Das, yourself, there's a few other people, or this train of writers who are trying to kind of, I think, trying to extricate Dharma from the Mahabharata in like unique ways, right? It's because that's really what Mahabharata, I think, at the core of it, is a Dharma text.
Absolutely.
It's whether it's Moksha Dharma or Grihastha
Raj
Dharma,
Dharma.
whatever it is,
Yeah,
it's all
everything.
Dharma, right? So I'm not talking about like the retellings, like whether it's going to Palace of Illusions or very other ones that come out, or I mean they're helpful to some extent, but what I really did enjoy in your book, which was, I think, it's in every chapter, is like you have a section, at least in the Kindle I see, like there's a section where you indicate, well, this is what we generally think about it, but here's what it's on in Vyasa, it's on in this, it's on in that, like when we talk about Babrik, right? People like, again,
Yeah.
the Mahabharata Katha, the follow up to the Mahabharata, by B.R. Chopra comes out.
Yeah.
And then they have Barbaric in there. And I remember people used to tell me, even growing up, about Barbaric. I'm like, um, I've never read about this character in the Mahabharata. I'm like, and I've read the Mahabharata quite a few times. I'm like, he never pops up anywhere. But
Yeah.
it's also like Edavan in the South, they talk about Edavan or not. But Edavan only pops up in like three passages in the entire Mahabharata. One is like in Bhishma Parvan, and then there's two others, I think, in Vana Parvan or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't really have a role. He's just kind of like Arjuna's son. He fought in the first day of war. He died, right? And then it's kind of just he moves on. But there's an
Yeah.
entire story built around it within local traditions. So I did enjoy the fact that in your book you are where you can demarcating what is in the text and what's not. So what kind of research did it take for you to figure out what is in the text, because there's so many different manuscripts, you touch upon this too, right? There's the
Yes.
Bori version, there's like northern recension, Saraswati recension, southern recension. So yeah, please go ahead.
So, Mukund, the good part was that most of these manuscripts are a lot more consistent than what people want to believe.
Huh.
Yeah. So, be it the Gita Press version, be it the Southern recension, be it the Bori, of course, takes all of those together. Yeah.
Right.
But what is interesting is that the key story, the key characters are not very different across all of these. Even if you take the Bengal edition or the K.M. Ganguly translation of the Bengal edition, right? There might be one or two incidents here and there.
Huh.
However, for example, if we take the Mahabharata teleseries or some of the recent Mahabharats, where they have tried to show, for example, Karna, yeah, they've tried to show him as this guy who was actually very nice, but because of his caste, he has always been discriminated.
Oh.
Yeah. So he is basically this warrior, and if you talk of today, he's one of those, human right activists that everybody wants to like venerate.
Yeah.
Now, in none of the manuscripts or translations of Vyasa's Mahabharata is this character of Karna. Karna has always, in all of this, he is one guy who is always extremely jealous, lots of matsarya, always complaining, always blaming others for his problems, and actually being instrumental in making the war of Mahabharata happen. Yeah,
he's kind of an
he
asshole.
was the one. That's the word.
That's what I think. Like when people talk about kind of like you're saying,
Yeah.
it's a sense of like, oh, he's Danavi Sura Karna, he's this giving, loving, compassionate person that will just be trodden. And sure, he had tough life coming up in some sense, right? Being the adoption part. But we also get the sense his parents in Mahabharata treated him well. They loved him and they gave him everything, right?
Exactly. He was treated well. It was not as if he grew up in poverty. And the worst part about the caste thing, he's made to show as somebody of the lower caste, which he is not. He's a Suta. So Suta were mixed jatis. Yeah. Now, again, what happens is our understanding of our past also a lot of times depends on our current understanding of the society, right? So we fail to understand that probably it was not like how it is now, only four jatis. No. Yeah. There were lots of mixed jatis at that time, where, say, a Brahmin lady was married to a Kshatriya man, and all the progeny were then called Suta. Yeah? Because they were supposed to take gunas of both Brahmins and Kshatriyas. Right. Because of which Sutas could be warriors, and there is Kichak, who is in the Virat Parva. Yeah? He is a Suta, extremely powerful commander, very powerful. Yeah. Even the king can't do anything to him. So he's a warrior. Then, of course, there are charioteers. But again, the understanding of charioteer is not like a driver. It's not that. Because Krishna was asked to be a charioteer. Okay, Krishna and Arjuna were friends. But even for Karna asked Shalya, right, to the king of Madura to be his charioteer because he wanted somebody who can be as good as Krishna. Right. So they had a very good stature in the society. It was not as a driver. Yeah, it was not that. Then there were also history keepers and storytellers. So the person from whom we get the version of Mahabharata, Ugrashrava Sauti. Right. Ugrashrava Sauti is the one who also comes from, as Sauti, the name itself suggests, he's also from Suta Jati. Yeah. So by that itself, they are not any discriminated Jati. They would do Ved part, they do Ved Adhyaya and all of that. So from that perspective also, he's not discriminated. Then they make it sound as if he was, Dronacharya refused to teach him because he was of a certain jati. Again, that is not true. He is Dronacharya's student, and this is coming from every version. You see Gita Press version, you see the Bengal edition, you see the Southern recension, you see the Bori manuscript, all of them have that he was Dronacharya's student. Yeah. So, anyways, the point I was trying to make is that some of this perversion of characters which has happened in recent retellings, actually I wouldn't even say recent, I think last 50 years this has been happening. One of the poets who I hold in a very high regard, Dinkar, Ramdhari Singh Dinkar, he's written this poem called Rashmirathi, and many people have been influenced by Rashmirathi. Rashmirathi is basically on Karna, and again he's shown Karna into this poor guy, very talented but discriminated. So even he has done that. Yeah. So I feel really bad because the poem itself is beautiful. But anyway, so this has been creation of characters has happened. But as far as research for Mahabharata goes, um, the characters are not too different across manuscripts. What is different though are the details and certain incidents, and I'll give you
Sure.
some examples of that. So, the southern recession is considered one of the largest, so to say, in terms of the shlokas that they have. And in that, you see a lot more veneration of Krishna.
Mhm.
Yeah. So lots of stutis for Krishna, all that you find in Southern Recession, which you probably don't find so much in the Bori edition. Because what the Bori edition did is that they collected some 1200 manuscripts, 1269 manuscripts,
Right.
and they got the common part of it. They said, Agar if majority of the manuscripts have it, I keep it. If only one or two manuscripts have it, I remove it.
Right.
Yeah. So they created that version. What Gita Press did is it took the northern version, which was available in the 1700s, the Nilkant Shastri's commentary,
Right.
and then they took the southern recension and they said, okay, what is it in southern recension that is not in the northern, not in their version? So let's add bits and pieces to it.
Right.
Yeah. So Gita Press in that sense is a little more of comprehensive compared to the Bhandarkar Oriental, but
Sure.
which also makes a little less consistent versus the Bhandarkar Oriental one. Now, what are the other details that Southern recension has which the others don't? So things like how old was Arjun when Pandu died, yeah. So some of these details we get from the Southern recension, which we don't
Right.
find in other places, yeah. Then there are certain instances like Sutam na Varyami. So when the Swayamvar of Draupadi is happening,
Yeah.
and uh, there's a very popular story that Karna was not allowed. She says, I will not marry. Sutam na Varyami, I will not marry Karna. Hence, he is not allowed to shoot the target in the Swayamvar.
Right.
So you find this in the Gita Press edition, though they have put a note saying that this doesn't seem consistent with what comes before and after. But in the southern one, it is very clear that this didn't happen at all. He actually tried and failed. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the Bori edition, also you see that maximum manuscripts that they had did not have this that she says Sutam na Varyami. So basically, they have dropped Sutam na Varyami. So there are some of these incidents here and there which are available in some and not in others. But it was not. But the research was not very difficult because largely the characters are the same.
Right.
And I refer to Gita Press edition as my base while referring Bori as and when required.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that must be a lot of research, right? You know, in terms of trying to read two different. I mean, probably you. I mean, I imagine you didn't sit down and read two different versions of Mahabharata because that would take 5 years to get through that. Especially with the Sanskrit, because for me when I read it, it takes a while. Like it takes me like
Yeah.
maybe an hour to get to 2 or 3 pages, right? Or maybe 4 pages with if I'm doing pure Sanskrit. That just because I need the dictionary next to me, and
Yeah.
it's because
Yeah.
the Sanskrit in the Mahabharata is mixed Sanskrit, right? There's some elements of Vedic, some of classical, but almost Patanjali like, but not quite. And then there's
Yeah.
so it's all over the map on that. So no, but I absolutely agree with you. Like with the idea of even Karna, like the way, but Karna's been an interesting character insofar as even Vyasa, right? Back
Yeah.
in the early
Yeah.
stages, Karna, but he does start giving Karna this slightly more
Yes.
compassionate, kind of more sympathetic like light. While the text itself is very scathing of Karna, I think Mahabharata is like
Very clear. There is no confusion
like
about what he is. Yeah.
I've never read of a warrior that runs away more, right? Every single time it gets really, really intense. He just
Correct.
turns tail and runs, right? Whether it happens
Correct.
in the beginning, fighting Drupada, or later on with the
Yeah.
Gandharvas.
The Gandharvas. Yes.
and he
Yes.
he does it the first time he in the Draupadi Swayamvara too, right? When he's fighting Arjuna, and Arjuna says, "I have the Brahmastra," and Karna turns around and just runs away. But I mean, again, these modern retellings don't get into that because the drama doesn't exist of having this
Correct.
that is
The
consistently,
oppressed guy, right? You need
yeah,
a victim who you can
yeah,
feel sorry about. So they want to
right.
create a victim out of Karna. Yeah.
But the same thing goes even I think when you talk about like Drona and Ekalavya, right? Like again, we talk in modern sense, it's an issue of caste versus in the Mahabharata. It's clear that well, his caste is there. He's clearly talked to me in Nishada. The reason Drona doesn't do it is because you belong to a different kingdom out there, and I'm only teaching the Kurus
Yes.
here, right?
Yes.
It's not because you are Nishada. I don't teach Nishada. It's because we know in his Gurukula there was many different castes that were being taught.
So Ekalavya,
Yeah.
so you're right? He is not refused by Dronacharya because of his caste, so to say.
Yeah.
Again, let's see who the Nishads are. Okay, Nishads are also mixed jatis. Somewhere they are called Brahman Shudra mixed jati. Somewhere they are called Kshatriya Shudra mixed jati.
Yeah.
Okay. Now these guys were known to be expert hunters. They were known to make great weapons, and they were also known to be great warriors. That is why in the Mahabharata war, there are Nishads fighting from both sides. There are some Nishad kingdoms, princes which were on Duryodhan's side. There were some others who are on the side of Yudhishthir as well. Yeah. So if they were not allowed to fight because of their caste, how is it that they became warriors in the first place?
Right.
Yeah. So clearly that the warrior fighting doesn't go only with the caste. One. Second, we see instances where during the Rajsuya Yagna of Yudhishthir, you have Ekalavya coming and gifting and all that as the king of his own kingdom. Yeah. So he has been that as well. How is Ekalavya killed? Ekalavya is killed by Krishna when he, along with the friends of Jarasandha, they attack Dwarka after the Rajsuya Yagna, after Jarasandha is dead, because they know that Krishna sort of, got Bhim to fight with Jarasandha and kill him. So they attack Dwarka. Now, when they attack Dwarka, Ekalavya is a part of that coalition and he gets killed by Krishna himself, right? So clearly, it is not as if the whole Bharatvarsha is discriminating against a certain caste. It's not that. But yes, he was refused. So what happened in that incident when Dronacharya refused? Now, Dronacharya was also teaching Karna, as we just discussed, right? So there were many people who were coming to learn with him. It was not, so to say, a caste thing. The way it is given in the Mahabharata, he says that looking at his own shishyas, Tan Anaveksha. Looking at his shishyas, he says, no, I can't teach him. That is all we are told. There is no clarification about was it caste, this, that, whatever. Anyway, so he decides not to teach him, and that's it. Now, there are some people who say that because his father was aligned with Jarasandha at that time already, possibly Dronacharya refused to teach because he was aligned with the Kuru kingdom. Yeah. That could be a case. Some others say that so anyway, it could be one of the cases. The thing is, we don't clearly know why that happened. He refused because there are people like there are others who are being taught by Dronacharya as well, who were aligned with Jarasandha at some point, like Shishupal and all were all his students, Dronacharya.
Right.
So could be true, may not be true, we don't know. However, as far as the punishment goes, so this is my view, completely my view. Yeah, I'm not saying anything. I firmly believe it is not a caste angle here at all. However, the punishment which Dronacharya gave him to take away his finger, was it fair on Ekalavya, the person, so to say? I feel maybe not. I feel it is a little harsh, so to say. Yeah. So, can we say that Dronacharya did it out of caste discrimination? Definitely not. But did he do something which probably was a bit too much? Yes. Yeah. So that's my stand on the Ekalavya issue.
Yeah, but I think even when I read the text itself, there's that inclination towards this is asking too much of a guru to ask of a shishya.
Correct.
Just because he promised another shishya, I'll make you the best, right? It's really his Dronacharya's like part of his determination to make Arjuna the best so that he can fulfill his goal of taking down Draupadi and doing this entire his revenge, right? Because much of his entire connection to Hastinapura is connected to his desire for revenge, and then
that's when he comes.
So and this is where I think it's like the Mahabharata, which again is so fascinating, is because these characters are so complex. Look, whether it happened or not, I do think it did happen. Probably not in the time frame of 5,000 BCE or something like that. It's probably something closer to probably something I think maybe a couple thousand BCE. But nonetheless, I think the stories here are based on kernels of truth, right? Like there's something here. I'm very much against the the idea of a lot of other modern Indologists who talk about the Mahabharata being this strata layered development over 1,000 years. I think it was a composition in a small amount of time. And I think you talk about this very briefly, and I'm sure you read so much of this in your research. So, what are your thoughts on this like composition of the Mahabharata, and where do you think, and what's your view on where this lies?
Okay. So, was Mahabharata, I mean, the version we have today, would there have been additions to it?
Sure.
Probably there would have been. Yeah, it's very old, could have been. Really no big deal in that. If we go by the Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, the version that they have compiled manuscripts going back from like 1000 AD. Yeah. So since 1000 AD at least, so what we know is at least from 1000 AD, what was believed.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah. Now, as far as the truth of Mahabharata stories go, I have a very simple way of looking at it. Our rishis were actually very smart. Yeah. If you see the categorization of the Indic knowledge system that we have, it's very clear and it's very detailed, so to say. We have the Shrutis and Smritis. Within Shrutis, we have the Ved, and in that the Samhita, Upanishad, all of that.
Yeah.
In the Smriti literature, again, it is not as if everything and anything is clubbed under one. Yeah, you have very clear classification of what is a Dharma Shastra. You have very clear classification of what will come under the Darshanas. Again, very clear what are the Vedangas. Very clear what are the Puranas, and very clear what is Itihas. Only two books are called Itihas. Not everything. Yeah? Only two books are called Itihas, and these two books are Ramayana and Mahabharata. They did not call Vishnu Purana as Itihas. No. They called only these two. Clearly, there was something in their mind when they did this classification, right? They could have called one the other, but they haven't done that. Now, the Itihas, the word itself in Sanskrit means Itiha Asa. So it was, thus it happened, Aisa tha. So clearly, it is again based on something that has happened in the past that our rishis are alluding to. Again, if we see the definition of itihas that comes from the Sanskrit dictionaries, from Vachaspatyam and stuff, they say dharma artha kama mokshanam upadesham samanvitam purva vruttam kathayuktam itihasam prachakshate. Purva vruttam, something that happened in the past. Very, very clear. Okay. Kathayuktam, that is told to us in the form of a story. And why? See, again, the thing is, our Shastras have always had a purpose. The purpose to give us jnana about Purusharthas, which is Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Very simply put, Gnan or wisdom about living our lives. So, Itihas is that which happened in the past, narrated in the story format, but it comes with a lesson for life.
Yeah.
Now, if you understand in the current context, right? The Gnan is available in Dharma Shastras also. The Gnan is available in Upanishads also. But it is theory. How do you live the theory? What do we have in our business schools? We have case studies. What are case studies? We take history of a event or a company and we say, oh, this is how it grew. This is how the mistakes were created. This is how it happened. This is how the results turned out to be. Now, when we see when we see the wisdom being played out along with the consequences of action, then the wisdom becomes very clear in our head what is being told to us, right? The theory becomes real for us. In that sense, Itihas is a case study of the Jnana of living life. Right? This is what we are told. And based on something that has happened, because only then it is real for us.
Right.
So if they themselves have told us that it is Itihas, I have no reason to disbelieve it, because then we have the entire part of Natya as well, right? Which is meant for entertainment. Natya is meant for entertainment. They call it Natya. They've not confused it with Itihas. That's one point, the definition per se. Second, I will say that the kind of information that we find in Mahabharata itself. Now, we largely focus on the story. However, we have a whole genealogy given of 50 kings before the Pandus, the Kauravas and Pandavas, right? It has no bearing story, so to say, but it is still there, right? Why did our ancestors take the pain to actually document so much? Because clearly the purpose was to document for the future, right?
Right.
That they would do, and people would carry it forward if it had some value to it, which is actual genealogy, actual family tree of our ancestor, right? Third, beyond just this, there is a lot of description of the geography of the place. Again, not really needed for the story. They didn't need to describe each and everything. They didn't need to describe all the tirthyatras, but it is there, right? Now, people might say some of it might be added over time, possible, right? But some of it was already there in
Right.
the original version as well. So even that documentation of the history where our ancestors came from was also one of the purposes. So taking all this into account, and now the dating that is being done on nakshatras. Now let's see what it throws up. But essentially, there are details in Mahabharata itself which also tell us that this is definitely history. Okay.
Right.
Now, what my biggest question? I just had one more thing, Mukund. My biggest irritation, if I may say so, yeah. In spite of all this, we always question that, array, where is the archaeological evidence? Where is the truth that all this happened? Should we just believe that because rishis told us? But we never question when it comes to other belief systems. Yeah, we never question that, array, virgin birth is not scientific. How are you claiming Christianity is true at all? Right? That question is never asked. Nobody says, oh, no, no, give us proof of virgin birth. But here the rishis are questioned. I mean, I'm okay. The questioning should happen. It increases our wisdom as a whole. But just trying to compare our own view systems of how we treat one versus the other belief system.
No, I mean, so on that, I think there's a lot of uh, a lot of questioning criticism in biblical scholarship, right? Whether you read people
Oh,
like
yes.
Bart Ehrman, N.T. Wright. I
Yeah.
mean, there's a whole group of scholarship that's just built around the early Christianity and then the early sources for the Bible, whether it's Q or all that stuff. So I think that is there. So even within the Judaic historical analysis, they have done quite a bit of criticism for the ancient Torah and so on. And luckily, because of the region that these Abrahamic traditions came out of, where it's a desert, it's much more dry, things don't decompose that quickly. There have been evidences found in the Indian situation. It's much more difficult, right? It's a humid climate. Things like disappear within minutes, or so quickly within the Indian world, and things have been continuously settled for thousands of years. It's much more difficult. And to be honest, let's just be frank, the archaeological work done in India hasn't been that extensive compared to any parts of the world. So there's still a lot of information that we don't have. And also, we're talking about so far back in human history that it's you're getting less and less likely to get information and data. So I do think that aspect is, I think there's some there, but like, what the issue comes out to me is, I think one of the big problems is the way we approach the Bible or the Quran in terms of understanding history from it and trying to prove the history from it is not the same way we should be approaching the Mahabharata, right? Mahabharata, even if the incidences in the Mahabharata are real, the Mahabharata wasn't written as like the Bible is written,
No.
in the same way. So, like, to try to read through the Bible and use the same tools of biblical exegesis for Mahabharata, that doesn't make sense to me. Because the purpose of Mahabharata is vastly different, right? There's so much, like, the narratives in the Bible are all connected to the narratives of the Jewish people in some sense, except the New Testament. But Mahabharata is like, it's vast. It's as if the person writing it was trying to capture everything we have
Everything.
about the ancient world that we knew in India, and say this is why it's all relevant, right? So, like, when you have the smaller stories, the upakyas, you have all the Nala Damayanti, like, why is that story
Yeah.
there? But it makes sense when you get into the conversation what Yudhishthira is going
Yeah.
through, right?
Yeah.
So how does it, just like you're telling me the case study of reading the Mahabharata itself is having a case study for Yudhishthira to look into, right? It's
Correct.
because Yudhishthira is also lamenting half the time about like his situation in the Mahabharata, and then Draupadi's slapping him around. I mean, I don't mean physically. I mean, like,
Yeah.
she's
Yeah.
intellectually just saying, you're so focused on this, but you should be focused on this. And this is it's such a like the husband and wife dynamic between Draupadi and Yudhishthira is very interesting to me. And even amongst all her other four husbands, the way they interact, it,
Yes.
it's as if the author was sitting there and understanding intricate marriage relationships and
Yes.
how they. So part of this is like, sorry, I'm going long-winded way of really saying like Mahabharata is like what is it? Is it Oldenburg or someone called it the monstrosity or something of that nature? I forget. One of the scholars called it that. The old like German scholars. And yeah, it is a monstrosity. It's a monstrosity of like amazingness. For me, it
Yeah.
captures so much knowledge that unless you understand what the narrative's trying to do with that knowledge, everything seems superfluous, right? Feel like, well, this story doesn't make sense, but when you actually touch the story later on,
Correct.
every thread is connected and completed in a story cycle somewhere. So I do find it that most people that try to engage the Mahabharata engage with it as thinking of it as like you read it bookend to bookend, but it's not just that. You have to sit there with these stories to understand why is this happening, why is this connection occurring, and what's there to learn. Like even the names themselves, right? Like Ukashava Shoti. Okashava, so what an awesome name is that, connecting to the telling of the story, right? It's a terrible story to tell, but and you touch upon this in your book too, right? It's such a fascinating. Like, where does he tell the story? Naimisha Forest, the forest of seconds, of minutes, of moments, right? It's just so brilliant, like the way the
Yeah.
Vyasa has put these things together. So I don't know. I'm geeking out over it because I when I read it every time, there's just a new word comes in. I'm like, that guy's name means, oh wow, like even the name Savyasachin, right? Like when you think
Yeah.
about Arjuna in the Gita,
Yeah.
Krishna says nimitta matam bhava Savyasachin, right? Think about that, his name connected to how he uses his arms as instruments. Krishna is making the same allusion to you be my instrument, right? It's so brilliant just the way that it's layered in linguistically, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. What
Yeah.
just a comment.
No, I think you're bringing a very fascinating point, but that just reminds me of one other point which people have asked me off late. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of people say that Vyasji was inherently biased, and that is why he calls what he calls the Pandavas,
Mhm.
but he names the Kauravas. He gives them a bad name to begin with, and I was like, what do you mean bad name to begin with? And he's like, see, he's called Duryodhan. His brother is called Dushasan. Yeah. So he's already giving a bad connotation to the names of Duryodhan and Dushasan. And I'm like, okay, hold on. What do you think are the meanings of these names? So they're like, no, no, they should actually be called Suyodhan. So Suyodhan and Sushasan, that would make sense. So I said, okay, fine. You know what? He is called Suyodhan. He is called Suyodhan in
Mhm.
Mahabharata. But do you know
Yes.
who calls him Suyodhan? So they're like, who? And I said, every time Draupadi or Krishna or Yudhishthir, they speak of Duryodhan, they call him Suyodhan.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, why is that so? But his own parents never call him Suyodhan. They call him Duryodhan only. Yeah. But why is that so if that's the case? Because Duryodhan, just because it starts with Du, is not a bad name.
No.
Duryodhan means one who cannot be defeated in the battlefield.
Like Durga,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
Durga doesn't. It's
exactly.
not a negative meaning. It's difficult to
Exactly.
approach, right?
So, and I'm like, if you want to call him Suyodan, go ahead. Yeah, you will agree. I mean, Draupadi would agree with you. Suyodan is somebody who can be easily defeated on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So, no, Vyasji was not biased. So, I mean, just a small thing.
No, but that's but that I think is like touching on these points, which is why I think your book is so important. It's actually people have these ideas in their head already of the Mahabharata, of the characters in the Mahabharata, and how they think they should appear, like Shakuni sitting in the corner, like rolling his dice here. But he was a formidable warrior. He did have some redeeming qualities here and there. He had his particular issues, and we get all that. And even like, I mean, except for this, discussion, I don't think there's really much redeeming about that guy. In the text, even he's just kind of a terrible person. But I think for a large part, even these characters as we see them, and the stories as we see them, are built with our own inherent bias, and that the text itself doesn't have, and the text is trying to give us something
Correct.
else. And this
So,
is like, yeah, go ahead, please.
No, so again, the thing about Shakuni, right? So
Yeah.
fascinating because as you just described, we expect that he's going to be this always scheming guy, always
Yeah.
wanting to do something bad. But if you see in Mahabharata, one, he's not this big a character anyway.
No.
Yeah. Of course, he's scheming and all that, but he's also not all that bad because there is an incident which comes after the Gandharva Yuddha. So the Gandharvas in the Gandharva Yuddha, when Karna runs away from the battlefield and the Gandharvas capture Duryodhan,
Yeah.
and Yudhishthir then sends his four brothers to rescue Duryodhan,
Yeah.
right? So after that, Duryodhan is very upset, and he's like, "Okay, I'm going to fast unto death because this is clearly, I mean, everybody is going to tell me that the Pandavas saved you, so I can't live with this ignominy. So I will give up my life." And at that time, Shakuni actually tells him, he said, "See, in spite of you taking away everything from the Pandavas, they still came to your rescue, right? Now you be a bigger man, give them their kingdom and become a bigger man. Everybody will say you have such a large heart, so why don't you just give it to them? And you have everything that you need anyway."
Right.
And Duryodhan doesn't listen. Now, when I wrote this in the book, and some people read it, and they were like, "Oh my God, Shakuni actually said it." I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," because he is not this black character which we are shown in the televisions because they want to create the masala, so to say, right? Then there is this thing about Shakuni that, oh, he had come only to destroy the
Kauravas,
Kuru.
yeah.
Again, nothing like that we find in Mahabharata. Yeah, he has come for sure. He has come. He is scheming with Duryodhan as Duryodhan needs him to. He's playing dice, but he's not really that big a character who's caused this war. He's one of the characters amongst the others. So, for example, in the beginning itself, Vyasji gives an example of a tree, and he
Yeah.
says Duryodhan is this tree of adharma, of rage, yeah, whose roots is Dhritarashtra, his own father. His Dhritarashtra's ambitions and his not doing anything about his son has made him what he is. The trunk of the tree is not Shakuni or anybody. The trunk of the tree is Karna, who's supporting Duryodhan and making him do everything bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then the branches are whatever Shakuni, and the leaves and everything are Dushasana. Dushasana and Shakuni, yes, supporting, but the two big things which have made Duryodhan and created the Dharma Yuddha, the Mahabharata Yuddha, are Karna and Dhritarashtra.
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean I think that's fascinating stuff. I mean, so what are your what are your thoughts on the because I know you've read pretty much everything out there in the Mahabharata literature, the scholarship stuff too. What are your thoughts on this idea that about the Brigalization of the Mahabharata and also the Christianization, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
um, I think, I mean, not really, because if you see the Bori version, right? So if you see the
Mhm.
Bori version and compare it with the Southern Recession or even the Gita Press, um, one thing is clear that over time, the Krishnaization has definitely happened in terms of Krishna becoming this larger than life God who everybody is always praying to. That said, there is still an aspect of Krishna being larger than life, which comes even in Bori. So at least by 1000 AD, when this, as back as then,
Sure.
when the initial manuscripts have come, Krishna definitely has a presence which is larger than everybody else in Mahabharata. So he's definitely this person who has an aura. Of course, not as what we see in some later recensions where he's become God, so to say. Yeah. So some of it has definitely happened, can't be denied for
Sure.
sure. And maybe that is why then the Bhagavad Puran was written later. A lot of stories which we hear of Krishna are not coming from Mahabharata. Yeah,
Well,
they
and
are largely
Harivamsha, right?
Harivamsha, yes. Yes,
Yeah.
they are coming from. So Harivamsha is also more like an annexure
Yeah.
to the
It's
main
Kila.
Mahabharata,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
No,
So,
yeah. So I mean, with Krishna, it's interesting to me because I feel like part of the text, like, is really, whether you look at Shanti Parva and then the Naraniya section where it connects all the Krishna aspect of it,
no,
or the
yes,
Panchanatras, right?
yes,
So,
yes.
but before that, the even the Avatar and the Parva in the Adi Parva starts with, about the nature of Krishna and then coming down and so on. But I think through the text, what you start to see is like the people he interacts with don't think that about him. Like, most people are like, like the way they talk about him, he's a coward. He's
Yes.
he's a fraudster. He's this, he's that. Like he's
Especially Shishupal and Duryodhana and all that. That's
yeah.
exactly how they
It's
talk to
just a
him. Yeah.
thread throughout the entire text. It's just moments where you get this moment of like, oh, there's something about him that's not
Yes.
really
Yes.
not really making sense, right? Like it's and it's only the few people, like whether it's Bhishma or even not even Drona, but the Pandavas or a few other, not even all the Pandavas, but it's just few people throughout the text get this glimpse of his divinity.
Correct.
But nonetheless, I think like the
And,
thread
and
of
because a lot of these parts, right, like the parts of Avtaran Parva or
yeah,
even Narayani Parva, you'd actually don't find them in the Bori version. Or
yeah,
it is they're very reduced versions versus what you see in Gita Press and others. Yeah.
yeah,
So clearly, these are all which have been built up over time, probably.
yeah, but like in the Bori version, you have the Narania section that's there very clearly because that
Correct.
is
So
is one of the big parts of the of Bhishma talks about that with, I mean, Narada Bhishma, but the Panchanatra doctrines and the very importance of the Narayana, because it starts with Narayana, Namaskrita, all that, right? So
and also the number Narayana and Namaskruti, it's a
it's
very
not in the
interesting
original,
one.
yeah,
Correct. So this was added by Suptankarji because he's like, no, it must be there.
yeah,
But there are lots of manuscripts where it doesn't start with that.
that's right,
Also.
that's right. It just, to me, for like, so I think Alf also writes about this. Alf Hittelbeidel, the scholar. He talks a lot about the uniform nature of the Mahabharata, and then later on his, like, I think his people that follow his tracks, Vishwa Adluri, and then
Yeah.
Joy Bakshi write a lot
Enjoy
about
the function.
the scholarship Mahabharata over the past 200 years, and how it's really doesn't make a lot of sense of looking at the text through those eyes, but kind of you have to look at it through fresh eyes and the eyes of the text itself, not so much of this like layering structure. So I mean, I do find when I read the Mahabharata, I think it is narratively very cohesive, right? And most of it, like 99.9% of it, is there for a purpose. It's not just
Yes.
extraneous. It's not just like vestige organs of of our human body. There's there for a purpose. So in that context, I mean, what what character, when you were doing your research, what character surprised you most for good reasons, and what character surprised you most for bad reasons?
So Karna, of course, for
Yeah.
bad reasons. And I think both Yudhishthir and Draupadi for good reasons, especially Draupadi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why?
Yeah. Yeah. So the television image of Draupadi is only that. Always, of course, the key part is the Vastraharan, that episode, and then she's always angry and wanting revenge. And in the television, you also see that she's like, no, no, get me blood to wash my hair. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is not in Mahabharata. One, it comes from a play called Veri Samharam. In that also, it's not exactly like this. She doesn't ask for it. It's just that Bhim gets it. But anyways, there is no lahu se bal dhuna in
Yeah.
the original text. But just the character of Draupadi is quite something in Mahabharata. There is this one part which I really really like, which is Draupadi Samvad. And in this Draupadi Satyabhama Samvad, Satyabhama and Krishna have gone to the forest during the Vanvas to meet the Pandavas and Draupadi. And Satyabhama and Draupadi are talking, and Satyabhama is like, um, I have just one husband, which is Krishna, and I find it difficult to keep him in my control. Yeah. But here you have five husbands, and all five are like deep into you. Even the way they look at you, the way they do your bidding, this is just fantastic. So you have a Vashikaran mantra. I mean, have you done some Jadu Tona on them? So if you have a mantra, you let me know. And Draupadi is like, no, there is no mantra that I have. It's just that I have ensured that I fulfill all my responsibilities, not only as their wives, but as also the queen of Hastinapur and the daughter-in-law of this family. And she goes on to explain, and this comes in, the details are given a lot more elaborately in the Gita Press version, more than even the Puri version, where she talks about her entire day and the work she does starting from morning to night. And it's just fantabulous. That gives us a insight into how a palace life will actually have been. Yeah? So she wakes up before everybody, she sleeps after everybody else. In the palace, there are like lakhs and lakhs of Brahmins and students and other people who come to eat. She has to ensure that all of them are eaten. Now, to take care of so many guests, there are so many maids and helpers that they have. She knows every maid by name, and she ensures that every maid does what they need to do, both male and female. And she also ensures that they are also well taken care of. Yeah.
Right.
This is one aspect. The other aspect is that she says that all the treasury, whatever comes and goes out of treasury, I have complete view on it, more than anybody else. I'm very well aware what comes, I'm very well aware what goes. Whenever Yudhishthir and others they go on their travels, I know how many horses and camels or whatever, elephants have gone with them. So I keep a track of all of that. Yeah. And she goes on to again just say how the way she manages everything around the palace with so many people always coming in and going out. So she's almost like this chief administrative officer of that place, taking
Right.
care of everything and anything. And the same thing is then actually corroborated by Yudhishthir when he says multiple times that that having a wife like Draupadi is a man's dream. If a grahastha wants to fulfill his grahastha ashram properly, Draupadi is like the best partner one could ever have. And even Vaishampayan, who's narrating the Mahabharata to Janmajay, confirms this, and he says that in the Rajasuya Yagna, Draupadi would be the one who would eat after every single person had eaten, after everybody was taken care of. Yeah. And then, so this whole thing about what Draupadi was comes out very clearly in this Samvad. That apart, even as you mentioned previously, right, the discussions between the dynamics between Draupadi and the husbands themselves is also very fascinating. She is not somebody who doesn't speak her mind. She speaks her mind. She tells Yudhishthir where she thinks he's wrong, right? She tells him when she thinks that he has to act. She talks about the karma siddhanta, the dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. She talks about the karma siddhanta, how effort and enterprise and destiny, they all matter. But just you can't leave things to destiny, because destiny comes into play only after a person does enterprise. Yeah. So all these discussions she has had. Then even during the whole Vastraharan episode, one her conduct, especially when Dhritarashtra tells her that you ask for boons. You tell me which boons you tell me what boons you want. And first she says, ensure that my husband Yudhishthir, who's the king, also ensure he's out of slavery. And then she says, my other husbands also ensure they're out of slavery and they're given their weapons back. And Dhritarashtra says, okay, what else can I do for you? Because I want to give you more wishes. She could have said, give us our kingdom back. But she doesn't say that. She says, no, this is it. Now, whatever else needs to happen, my husbands are capable enough to do that. My job is done by ensuring that they get their weapons back and they are free to behave and show their parakram or their warriorship. As long as they're free to do that, I don't care for anything else. Yeah. So in that kind of a situation, also this woman doesn't forget what her boundaries are. She doesn't forget her dharma, both as a Stree, as the queen of and the daughter-in-law of the kingdom. So throughout, you see that in her action, like a very, very strong character, very responsible character.
And the thing, about Draupadi too, is, when I read through it, what strikes me as very that people don't really touch upon is how educated she is, how knowledgeable she is, not only about like the ability to speak well, but knowing what she's talking about, like the text or referring to Vedic knowledge or whatever. So there clearly
she refers to manuscripts in one of the dialogues. Yes.
So just the way how well she is. I mean, she really is one incredibly smart, right? She is this person that is in many ways guiding the Pandava brothers in their time of worst need, right? Like when they're, and it's crazy to me to think about it when, yes, they lost their kingdom, but she was the one that lost everything more, right? Like her honor, honor is something that she has, like being destroyed, but she has the ability to guide them when they're distraught all the time. and then and her position is step back and be like, hey, Yudhishthira, you consider this and this and this.
Yes.
And she does it not through anger and fire, but like she uses that the anger in a very like surgical way,
Yes.
to address, to talk about these issues. And,
Yes.
and the conversations, like I said before, when in the Vana Parva between Yudhishthira and Draupadi are some of the best I've ever read anywhere, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
Even during the Virat, they when they spend that 1 year
yeah,
in Agyatwas, right, in disguise, even there, in spite of all that she goes through because of Kichak,
yeah,
she doesn't disclose.
no,
Yeah, she doesn't go and fight. She's upset. Of course, she tells Bhim that Kichak needs to die. Yes, that happens. But even after that, when Virat throws this dice at Yudhishthir and Yudhishthir's
breaks his
nose
nose,
starts
yeah,
bleeding, she's over there, but she ensures that even at that time they don't know who they are, right? She
yeah,
ensures she doesn't disclose in spite of everything. So she has been this pillar for the Pandavas. That
yeah,
is why the chapter in the book when I talk about Draupadi, I call her the marriage that tied.
yeah,
Basically, she tied all of them together. She was the pillar of strength for the Pandavas.
yeah,
And in fact, Karna says that. So Karna says that the Pandavas were drowning after the Vastrahara episode. He says the Pandavas were drowning, and Draupadi came as a nauka, as a boat, and pulled them out of their misery and brought them ashore. Yeah, she sort of brought them by the shore and saved them. Karna actually says that.
yeah. From Karna, that's something.
After being the only one in the text to call her a prostitute, a varna.
That's right.
Nobody has called her that. He's the only one who says it.
I know he's a terror, but then like when you hear him later on in Karna Parva when he talks about the women of Madra to annoy Salya,
Yes.
he calls them all prostitutes. He calls them so many names. He's like this. In some ways, I feel like Karna is like this toxic masculinity at some level, where the Pandavas represent, like even Bhima's anger, like
Yeah.
there's this compassionate, loving side,
Yes.
this caring side that comes through, right? Like even the stories of getting the flower in the Himalayas for Draupadi,
Yeah.
and the way and the way he talks to Draupadi even after
Yeah.
Kichika, right? When everyone else, all her other husbands, kind of just like say, just bear it, bear it, bear it. He's the one that's like he's so full of he's concerned about her.
Yeah.
He's concerned about her. It's not even his anger towards Kichika. It's his like compassion towards his wife
Yes.
that comes through. So I find like when you actually read the Mahabharata, the characters become so much more alive and real in some sense, right?
Very true. So Bhim, in fact, not just for Draupadi, even the small interactions with Kunti when Kunti is leaving, right?
Oh yeah.
So Bhim is this guy who's actually the more emotional of everybody, of the brothers, right?
Yeah.
That is why it's very interesting. People would think that Arjun is the favorite of everybody, but that's not the case.
Bhima is.
Bhim is the favorite. So even for Yudhishthir, during the Yaksha Prashna episode, the Yaksha, when he says that, oh, you wake up Nakul, when the Yaksha says that, who should I wake up? And the Yaksha asks him, but you love Bhim the most. Bhim is your favorite. Why did you not wake him up? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that you're like, oh wow, okay, this is very interesting. But that's just exactly how Bhim was. He was always there for his people. Always.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like
forest, be it when they needed help, when they had requests, everything. He would fulfill it all.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's for everyone. Arjuna was the guy for the future, right? You're gonna do something great, but Bhima was the foundation. Like every single thing, everyone relied on Bhima's strength.
Very dependable.
Yeah. He's always been he's been he's my favorite just because I think he is the foundation in which the Pandavas existed for until the Mahabharata war, until Arjuna gets the weapons, actually, until he goes to Swarga to get all of the divyastras. Until then, Bhima was just the one that chugged along.
Even the war, right? Even the war itself, I think Bhim doesn't get the due for what he's done.
He killed more Rakshohinis by himself.
He killed more Rakshohinis, and he had no confusion ever. Arjun had confusion, right? Arjun would be like dilly-dallying, how do I kill my grandfather and teacher and all of that. Beach mein Yudhishthir in the beginning and then at the end, after the war, has
Yeah.
some confusion. Bhim doesn't have any confusion. He's like, no,
No,
this must be done. And whatever needs to be done, I will do it. No problem, no confusion, very clear what matters and what doesn't in terms of
I
prioritizing.
still, for that example, one of my favorite ones is the day after Abhimanyu was killed, and then they're fighting Drona first. It's Arjuna who goes by him by saying, "You're my teacher. I don't need to fight you." And the Satiki comes and does the same thing, and Bhima just has no qualms. Yeah, he has no
He's like,
qualms.
8 times I'll break your chariot. 8 times.
He's just, for me, he's brilliant that way. He's just, everyone else, Drona's like, "You can go too." Bhima's like, "Nope, I'm gonna take you down." It's just this really, his character is just like, he's so fixed, but he's also so compassionate and loving, and people think he's a dullard, but in fact, so
He's
many
not.
times he's really, really intelligent.
He's intelligent. He's also very pragmatic. So
Yeah,
when the negotiations are going on, after the Agyatwas, after they've lived through the
yeah, yeah,
disguise and the negotiations are going on, at that time he also says that okay, if these guys give us 5 villages, we are okay, because a war would have been disastrous, and it was, right. Almost
right,
45 lakh plus people died in that war. So
yeah,
even that time, he's not like, "Arey, no, 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 I want to fight." He says, no, no, if it helps, we are going to be okay with 5 villages. And that is when actually Draupadi becomes upset because she doesn't expect Bhim to say that of all people.
right.
But even he says that, yeah. So he's also very pragmatic when he needs to be. So he's not a dullard at all.
So, here's a tough question, and I mean, this was one I always grapple with is in Kunti, for the House of Lack, right? The
Yeah.
5 Nishadas. I always grapple with that issue. But it's a very, it seems very callous to me, but I also understand the motivation behind try to save her sons. But it sticks with me a lot. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
So if you read the text, the way it is given, one, it is not as if they are invited. So there is no big planning that has happened to say that we will somehow get these people and we will kill them. Yeah, nothing like that is done. It just so happens that a lot of people come and party and drink and eat when they are there. These guys also come.
Yeah,
Yeah. Now others go away to their homes. These people basically had too much to drink and passed out.
yeah,
Now the text does not tell us at all whether it was done on purpose. It was not done on purpose. It was just said that these guys also came, they passed out, and that night, these people decided to go away. Okay.
yeah,
So it was not as if there was any complex planning done or a conspiracy hatched to kill these people. I think it was more like a destiny that just came to the Nishads and the mother. Yeah.
yeah,
That they came there, drank so much that they passed out, and that night was the one these guys decided to do.
yeah,
So it worked in the favor of the Pandavas for sure, but it was the Nishad and their mother just got extremely unlucky with that situation. Yeah. Now the thing here, many times people use this incident to say, "Arey, you are telling me that Pandavas are good and Kauravas are bad,
hmm,
but see what Pandavas did." Now I will say, why did even if this happened, why did the Pandavas have to do what they did? Because they were put in that position by the Kauravas only. Na? Duryodhan made this whole thing happen, where he tried to burn Pandavas and Kunti.
yeah. But the Pandavas didn't know anyway. Either way,
The Pandavas didn't know about the Nishad, you mean to
yeah,
say,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
Pandavas knew about so they had planned that they will go away someday.
yeah,
They
yeah,
will
hundred
burn
percent,
and go away. It
yeah,
just happened that these people passed out over there, and Pandavas probably, if at all, did not really go around looking in every place and did not wake them up and put them to safety, right?
sure,
That they didn't do. But then they were also fighting to live. They were struggling themselves, right? They were trying to survive and ensure they lived safely or they got out safely of that place. So
right.
yes, it is. It does feel like, oh, if they were so great, maybe they should have checked every single room and taken out people who are not there. right? But I mean, come on, that's too much to expect out of them. It is not. It was not a conspiracy,
Yeah.
at least not what the text tells us.
Yeah. I mean, I have to go back. I don't remember that the words used there if Kunti knew or not, but yeah, I'll go back and look at that again. But and similarly, it's interesting to me when the Khandava incident occurs, Krishna and Arjuna, right?
Yeah,
And that's also, but think, and this is where I think it's so important for people to read these things, because it's not as if like this is a fairy tale, right? There is violence, there is actions that appear to be very very problematic, that the story itself is grappling with, right, in many ways. Like the Arjuna and Krishna, kill everything in the forest, right? Don't let anything leave until, and what they even kill Takshaka's wife and son, right? Ashwasena and his wife, which leads to the larger story of Janamejaya. I mean, doing this
yes,
Sarpa
the
Satra.
yagna, satpa
So it's
satra.
just how, I mean, again, this is where like that little detail that made no sense in the beginning or in the middle of the text, where why did they talk about this snake that he killed? Who cares about this dumb snake? And then you're like, oh, it connects to this snake, and it connects. It's brilliantly done,
Yeah.
but the incident itself is very gory. I think the way it's described. Yeah.
So you're right. It's very, very gory. Yeah. And if we think of it in the present context,
Yeah.
I think it is not easy to explain this situation.
Yeah.
But what I find very fascinating, Mukund, is this: in the text per se, not once an allusion has been made that this was something wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, Agni Dev comes. He gives he the Sudarshan Chakra comes
Yeah.
from the Gandhi comes
Gandiva
from,
also,
right.
and the
So
quivers.
they have actually made it sound as if this was a desirable thing to do,
Yeah.
right? Then my question is that, is it we are being too judgmental of a situation we don't understand, or are we trying to explain away something which probably would have been not such a big deal then as we think of it as now, right? The other thing is also that even today we do clearing of the forests around to expand our cities or whatever, right? A lot of people, not sorry, not people, but a lot of jeeva jantus get killed in that. A lot of
Yeah.
destruction happens there as well. But we are okay with that because we see the immediate benefit of it. We don't think of it twice, right? Possibly it was something of this sort, but told in a way that Agnidev needed to be satisfied. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we always have this katha element as well. Yeah. So
Right.
yes, very gory. Nobody's allowed to live, and except Maya, the Mayasur, right, who makes
Yeah. Yeah.
the Maya Sabha for them. Apart from that, nobody else is allowed to live, and it is very gory. But the only way I try to make sense of it is to say that whenever there is an adharmic activity that has happened, it has been flagged
Yeah.
in some way through some dialogues. But this is not flagged at all. Yeah, nobody seems to say that, "Arey, this was bad." So possibly it was the way I try to understand it now is that maybe it's just something that was acceptable then and we can't make sense of it right now. Yeah.
The way I thought about it was like, it's inherent. Like, you want to build a city, you're
Correct.
destroying, like you just said, you have to clear out something, and that clearing out, you are destroying. Even though we don't like to think about it today, or we don't talk about it today,
Yes.
you're destroying so much life. Like,
Absolutely.
even now when they go like to cut down trees and whatever, this is just for trees, for our consumption of paper or this or that,
Correct.
you know
Correct. Correct.
they're not walking through the forest to make sure that no animal is not harmed.
Absolutely.
And the same goes for when we do controlled fire burns in the forest to prevent us from having forest fires, right?
Correct.
We're not that concerned about the animals as much. We're more
No,
concerned, oh,
absolutely.
the fire shouldn't come over to our houses, it shouldn't come over to our land, so we do a burn range, so animals absolutely die in that.
How are our cities created, right?
Yeah.
Once upon a time, this was all forest land. So
Right.
how is it that we live in this civilized cities
But I
what
think
we call
that
civilized?
it comes at, and this is where how I think about this is, for us, any of us, to sit in a city and look at people and say, hey, you messed up, but we're here because you messed up that way. And we're living this life of luxury that's prevented from having to go into forest every day,
Correct.
take fruits from a tree or kill an animal. This process or whatever that we are imbibing in is because someone had to take on the dharma of the action, right? And this is always the case. And so I
Correct.
think like that's how I think about this.
Yeah. No, no, I agree with you. So, I mean, as I said, right, that we also do clearing now. So
Yeah,
I completely agree with you. It's just that they don't call it for clearing the city, and hence I think people have this discomfort with that incident, so to say. But
right.
yeah, I think this is the way to make sense of it. Yeah.
So, I mean, aside from the cosmological significance of a yajna, this was an entire yajna to get this going. But addition to that, what I also this is another story that I find that people don't know, but it's very interesting to me is when Gorochkacha gets killed. You know, like everyone's in mourning, and then Krishna is dancing around in joy. You know, because Gorochkacha is killed, and then and I was shocked when I first read that. I was like, I thought the way I saw this was the relationship was like, but Krishna's point wasn't that. It's goes back to the avatar in the Parva, right? What's his purpose? Is for the reason for the avatara, right? It's the clearing of the earth, of making the burden less.
Yes.
Um, and he does that to his own clan, by the way. So
Yes.
so. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, I'm sure when you read it, it was must have been a little jarring too.
It was, but again, right? With Krishna, the thing is, Krishna is called Yogeshwar,
Yeah,
and there is a reason for it. Like if we read the Gita throughout, Krishna is talking about samatva buddhi.
yeah,
Everything goes back to buddhi. Everything has to do with your buddhi, right?
yeah,
That's where it comes. And then he lives his life also without with that knowledge of buddhi, what matters, what not. One person who's not confused, right? In the beginning itself, he has said that you are only a nimitta. Whatever, all these people that you see in front of you are anyways dead,
right.
right? You are only going to be a nimitta to make that happen. If you don't do it, somebody else will, because this death, the birth and death cycle goes on and on and on,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So for him, Ghatotkaч is also one of those
That's
players
right.
in the larger scheme of things, right? Like his own people, like Abhimanyu. You don't even see him crying during Abhimanyu,
No,
right? He's not crying for anybody because he's like, okay, this is how it is supposed to be.
yeah,
Eventually, it is about dharma sthapna. It is about setting the right precedent for the society. So yes, it is jarring because he's like, oh, see, now you're going to be safe. Now Karna can't do anything. This was my biggest worry. So what he tells
yeah,
Arjuna is essentially that I was really worried that he has this Indrastra, which he will use on you, and it is going to be fatal if he uses on you.
yeah,
So now that has been done away with. So I'm very relieved now because presence of Arjun was required to win this war.
yeah,
Right? Without Arjun, they could not have won the war. It is very clear.
yeah.
And because they all played their part, so somebody had to be sacrificed for the war to be won. And the war was no ordinary war, as they keep calling it. It's a dharma yuddha,
Yeah,
and we all have to pay the price for the dharma yuddha. It's never going to
absolutely.
be.
So on that part, it's actually interesting to me too, right? Like on this, you know, Garuchkuta gets killed, and then Krishna dances around, and that's when he explains. This is when you find out he killed Ekalavya. You know, I
That's
don't think
when
I
he
mentioned it
says yes,
before. He says
yes,
I
yes.
killed Ekalavya, this and this
Yeah,
person
yeah.
for this purpose, right? To alleviate the burden of earth. But I also think it's interesting that Krishna, who is normally even keel about things, when he thinks about Arjuna dying, he just gets this his fervor, and he says he tells his charioteer, you know, Daruka, to
Yes,
bring his everything ready. He'll break all his vows to save Arjuna. And for
yes,
me, what it breaks down to is like when I think about the names himself of, you know, who is Krishna is Narayana, who is Arjuna Nara, is the relationship between God and man.
Naranara.
So,
Yes,
and this is similar to Indra and Vishnu through the Vedic motifs, right? So this idea that the spirit of man will always be protected by God and will always be followed by God, and that when man itself is in dire straits, God will do anything to come to protect him. It's so beautiful to me, this analogy
when
here.
when there is complete surrender on the part of the Nara. And that
Yeah,
is the relationship with Arjuna and Krishna share.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That is why, to think of it, he chose Krishna versus an entire Akshahoni army.
Yeah, the
From
Narayana Sena. Yeah,
all war strategy perspective, this sounds dumb because
yeah,
one man, however smart he is, he's also saying, I'm not going to fight the war.
yeah,
But that is the kind of Shraddha which Arjun has in Krishna,
yeah.
right? That is when Bhagwan comes. When you have that kind of surrender. One is that, and second, again, uh, Arjun being present for Dharma Sthapana was extremely important.
Of course.
So both of these things go together. Yeah.
Yeah, again, this is also the Vedic motif, right? Ultimately, Indra does the killing of Ahi, Virata, and then you have Vishnu who assists, who's always assisting. Is not the one
Upendra
who's,
there.
yeah,
Yeah.
who's not the one doing it himself. He's assisting, whether he's fighting Namuchi, all these. Indra's doing the action, and same
Yeah.
way, like in this Mahabharata, Arjuna is doing the action, and Krishna is
Actually.
assisting, right? Because ultimately, karma has to be done by individuals. God's there to to
Only guide
yeah,
and support.
yeah.
So
So
that's why I love that shloka in Gita. So after 700 shlokas, Krishna
yeah,
says, Yatha HC Tatha Guru. Now you
yeah.
do as you
As
wish
you
because
want.
I can only guide you. I can only be your
Yeah,
sarki. Right?
yeah.
Karma phala is for you to bear. There I can't do anything. Karma and
Yeah.
karma phala is for you to take care.
Which I mean, so this is where I feel like these ideas start, like when you start thinking about the names themselves, and then you see the relationships throughout the stories. Mahabharata just, it starts like throbbing with like poignancy and just like relevancy all the time. Like anything in life, I really just go to Mahabharata. I'm like,
Yeah.
there's like almost, and I read a lot, but like I almost feel like in many ways Mahabharata is like the only book one needs in addressing life's issues. Not to say to be a physicist or like if to be a
Yeah.
geneticist, you don't need Mahabharata for that,
Of
but
course.
like for your inherent like ability to engage with the world and try to be good and try to do your best in this world. It's such a brilliant text of just like
Absolutely.
storytelling. I mean, not just storytelling, but it's just humanity.
I think the best part is it sort of helps us to deal with our Dharma Sankata. Yeah.
Yeah,
And we always have a Dharma Sankata, what we can very simply say as ethical dilemma.
yeah,
How do you behave in a situation like this? Because every single individual in Mahabharata has had a Dharma Sankata,
yeah,
and the choice that that person made determined what history will judge him or not judge him.
right,
Right? So it is a shastra which is all about Dharma Sankata and making decisions in spite of the Dharma Sankata that you
yeah,
have. So that's again the underlying theme of Mahabharata, right? Dharma and Dharma Sankata. How do you get
yeah.
out of it?
So let me ask you this question. Obviously, while you're reading the book, and not everything can come in the book, but what are your thoughts on the didactic portions of the text? Right, like you have whether conversations with Anushasana and Shanti Parva,
Yes.
or you have the conversations with like the Sulabha Janaka, or the various characters that have these long conversations. You know, um, I feel like people miss out on that, and there's so much beauty and
Yes.
knowledge and wisdom there. So, I mean, how do you? I mean, give me your thoughts on that. I mean, I don't know what my question is here, but really, yeah,
Yeah. So I think those parts are very, very important. I took a conscious call to not focus on that part, so to say, in this
yeah,
book, because this book was meant largely to clarify the story of Mahabharata itself. But even then, I have added parts of it, like at least the main parts of both the Shanti Parva, the Vidur Niti, all that I've added,
yeah,
because I think some of these things are just not to be missed. Yeah,
yeah,
they help. So when we say how to deal with Dharma Sankat, right? A lot of these didactic portions actually tell us the Shastric view.
yeah,
A lot of it is actually aligned with what, say, a Manusmriti or what an Yagnavalkya Smriti would tell us, especially parts around Raj Dharma.
yeah,
How should a king live, right? Grahastha Dharma. I think, but even more than Grahastha Dharma, I think the Raj Dharma part is something which people should not miss out on, because we talk about leadership theories, all of that. I think Raj Dharma is all about that, not just related to people in the government, so to say, but even in our own lives. How is a leader expected to behave,
right,
right? There are portions around that. Then there are portions around just managing your own personality. For example, Yaksha Prashna. The Yaksha Prashna, the whole thing is about what happens, who is happy. Yeah. Then what is the role that anger, or rather, what happens when a person is angry? What happens when a person gives up anger? So basically, the shudder ripus that we talk about, how do these impact us, and how how being aloof from them, or how protecting ourselves from the shudder ripus, what will it give us? What kind of contentment, what kind of happiness it gives us,
Mhm.
right? So I think these portions are very, very, very important. And even beyond the story, I think there must be a focus on this. I hope, hopefully, in the future, sometimes with Krishna's grace, I can have a book only on those portions, especially making it more contextual to today's time.
Yeah.
Because I think that is where the wisdom is, largely.
No, absolutely. I think about this a lot because there's so much, even when we think about governance, what the role of governance is, what the
Correct.
role of
The Raj
what's the
Dharma.
relationship between the citizen and the king's duty towards the state and so on. It's talked about very, very intricately there, right? Like, some people, like, I find it fascinating that Bhishma in some sense gives the people, human beings, the citizens, the right to revolt, right? The right to revolt and dispose a king. Like, there's no divine right kingdom across anywhere in Europe that had this idea. The king is the king because God has told you it's king. But within the dharmic context, no, as long as a king is dharmic, he has the right to be there.
Correct.
The moment he breaks
Exactly.
that bond, then the citizens have the right to dispose of that individual and put on who else ever they want. Which is what you get up with the story with, with Prithu and Vani or Vena, right? So that entire story is about that.
That's the thing, right? Because every underlying all of this is dharma, and dharma is about sustainability. So
Yeah,
a bad king will not help sustainability of his kingdom, and
yeah,
hence he needs to go.
yeah,
So everybody else is subservient to dharma, to the sustainability principle essentially. That matters the most. Dharma
right.
sansthapanarthaya. Even Krishna comes for dharma sansthapanarthaya.
Yeah,
Everything else is secondary to it. And that is what comes out in all of this. So when we talk about governance is Raj Dharma, right?
mhm,
When we talk about Grahastha Dharma, it is about taking the family unit.
yeah,
And how should the sustainability of a family unit come about? Every person has a role to play to make that system work, right? Even if one person does not live in accordance with dharma, that unit is supposed to break. It will break,
right.
right? So, in fact, the first chapter of the book of Mahabharata Unravelled, I started with dharma because I said, without understanding, even at least conceptually, we
Yeah,
will not understand what Mahabharata is all about. Why Krishna does things which look wrong if we go by the more right, wrong, black, white, right?
yeah,
But he still does it, and he explains why he's doing what he's doing,
yeah,
right? He's not just randomly breaking rules for convenience. No, he's not lying for convenience. He's very clear. He's like, as far as possible, you must say the truth. As far as possible, you must follow the rules that have been set. Because if you don't do that, then there will be anarchy, right?
right.
But in certain situations, to preserve that unit itself, you have to do things which don't seem so black and white. Because only by doing that, you will ensure that the larger system survives.
Right.
So that's where everything is coming from.
And that's connected to what Vidura says, in order to save a family, you give up a person
Your
in order
son,
to save,
yeah,
and so
one
on and so
person,
forth.
yes.
But then in order to save the world, you give up yourself, right? The very idea is, that at these levels you give up material things, but in order to give up the world, you have to get rid of the self, right?
Yeah,
Ultimately.
actually, what he's saying is to protect yourself. So for you to be free of your own guilt
Yes.
conscious, yeah,
Yeah.
give up everything else. What
Yeah.
eventually matters is that you have a clean conscience, something
Yeah.
that you never feel guilty about.
That's
And
right.
inherently, we all know what is right and wrong, right? Always. It's just that there are the indriyas, our senses, are so overpowering that we still do what we must not do. And then all this depression starts because there's this guilt and this and that and all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I just feel like, so again, like, I'm taking so much of your time, but we'll wrap up very shortly. There's all this didactic stuff that I think is so fascinating, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do with it, and in your next book. But also at the sense of what are your thoughts about how not only how the Mahabharata can you know affect us today in our individual world and our individual lives? What role can it play in kind of the way Indian society is viewing itself and dealing with itself? Because right now I feel like there's a lot of tension, especially you know amongst different communities, and then also the way the India itself is being portrayed to the West and the way the West is responding to India. There's a lot going on. What can Mahabharata here give us a sense of?
Mukund, I think one is just one, if one reads the Mahabharata, right? A lot of stereotypes about how women were treated or how
Mm,
the caste dynamics, okay, I shouldn't use the caste word, but varna, jati dynamics were being played out at that time, um, become clearer. Yeah. One is, of course, the wisdom part of it. One is just how the policies can be impacted based on the wisdom, the didactic portion that comes out of Raj Dharma governance and all of that, right? I'm not
yeah.
talking about that. I'm talking from a narrative perspective right now. That a lot of narrative that has been imposed on us, saying that, "Arey, aap to jativadi ho, women had no rights and stuff," right? Now, of course, I go to office today. Was Draupadi going to office and working? No, of course not. Right? This situation was different. But did that mean that Draupadi was not empowered? Did that mean that Draupadi couldn't take her decisions? Not just Draupadi. Let's take it. Let's look at simple characters, smaller ones. Ulupi, Hidimba,
Mm,
right? They took their own decisions. They were upfront and saying, "I like your son," or "I like you. You please sleep with me and give me a kid." Right? Very, very
Satyavati.
upfront.
I mean,
Satya, of course, there's Gandharva. He says, "Oh, you marry me as Gandharva." She said, "Okay, okay, good, good, because I also like you." Yeah, very simple.
yeah.
So the women had agency, and that is what empowerment is all about at the end of the day, right? So
Yeah.
to tell us that, oh, women were always oppressed, women didn't have this, women didn't have that, that is wrong. That is outright wrong, and that becomes very clear when you read both the Mahabharata and Ramayana, the way the women would decide. Of course, there were fixed roles, right? Because the society was such that the technology was such that there were certain roles males fulfilled, there were certain roles women fulfilled. That is different. And if women did not have freedom to choose, the men also did not have freedom to choose. They had to live their life the way they had to, because
Hmm.
a lot of the changes happen with technology. So you have to take that into account as well, right?
Sure.
Similarly, it goes for the jatis as well, right? We are made to think that everything was so boxed, there was no fluidity, people would do only one kind of work. But no, as you see, there are mixed jatis and mixed jatis. How did that happen? How did the Suta jati or other jatis come about? Clearly, there was intermingling, right?
Yeah.
Also, if you see what you mentioned for Satyavati, right? So
Yeah.
Satyavati is a fisherwoman's daughter in that sense.
Yeah.
Now, of course, they have given a backstory that, oh, she might have been a Kshatriya's
But no one knew that.
daughter. Exactly. Shantanu didn't know that, right?
No.
Shantanu didn't know that at that time. He was still okay to marry her, and nobody in the kingdom objected to have a lady from that community as the queen. How is that?
And
The
let
other
alone
thing is,
Parashara didn't know that either when he was taking her on the
exactly,
boat.
exactly, exactly, right? And still nobody had a problem, which means the whole jati thing was really not that big a deal as it is made out today for us, right? But still, the narrative for us is that we use Karna as a narrative for caste,
Yeah.
and we buy it because we don't know what our text has.
Yeah.
So these knowing just these texts for what they are will help us understand the society itself, which was not a monolith, which was a lot more fluid, lot more open. Just think about the Niyog, the system of Niyog, right? All five Pandavas are not actually Pandu's sons,
No.
right? For that matter, Dhritarashtra, Pandu, Vidur, they also the bloodline they trace to Ved Vyasji,
Right.
not the, and still, I mean, Ambalika, so they still have kids and everything, right? So the society itself is a lot more open and accepting
Right.
of even progeny outside of marriage, or even this kind of arrangements which were done for progeny to ensure your lineage continues and stuff like that. right?
I mean,
Women
even Kunti, right? She's Vasudeva's sister, but she was given an adoption to
correct.
Kunti Boja,
Kunti
right?
Boj, correct.
So like these things, like just to further your point, right? You have the stories of like Vishwamitra and Dharmavyada, or
Yeah,
Kaushika and the
yeah,
Chandala, all these
yeah,
things where you have people from what we call subaltern Dalit class. Maybe, I mean, maybe these terms are very uh, I don't know if they mesh on perfectly, but
yeah.
these people that we would consider to be untouchables or whatever it is at that time, or were engaging directly with these
In fact, you
apparently,
see that there is nothing like
yeah,
untouchability as well, right? Because
yeah,
you
yeah,
see in Ramayana, Guha, who's a Nishad, and
yeah,
Ram goes and hugs him,
yeah, yeah,
right? Even here, there is when the Pandavas, they are in disguise and they go to Kampilya for the Swayamvar of
yeah,
Draupadi. They live in a potter's hut. It is shown.
yeah,
They are dressed as Brahmins living in a potter's hut. Why
yeah.
would they do that if it was such a casteist society, right?
And
But
that's
yeah,
exactly the point, right? Like people read, again, this is where the problem is. People read manusmriti and they think manusmriti was the law of the land, it existed this way, and they think about what life was like today, or even 18th century or 19th century India. So
correct,
it must have been that case for thousands of
correct.
years, because it couldn't have been anything else. And I think this is where we have, like you said earlier, it's the reading of today's world into the past, instead of just understanding that was a different society. It
Yeah,
functioned differently. It looked differently. It flowed differently. And we can't. But this is always a problem with India. I feel like people think because India is this eternal, like fixed world, that India has been the same for all time. And you're just like, no, it's a dynamic, very, very complex world, right?
absolutely. We're such an old civilization, right? Things
Yeah,
have undergone so many changes. The fascinating part is that we still have that knowledge and we have references to go back to it and understand what probably we were at that time. So that's
absolutely,
very fascinating. That the
absolutely.
continuity still stays.
Yeah, I know. It's stayed for at least 4,000 years, and that's kind of
Yeah.
awesome, right? Like I still think it's fascinating that, you know, if you learn Sanskrit now in Parani style, like, Ashtadhyayi, you can read any Sanskrit text for the past 2,600 years, and
Absolutely.
understand it completely. You can't do that with any other language on this planet. So it's still a fascinating, like, it's so mind-boggling. But I mean, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any last thoughts or ideas or anything that you want to tell our audience? No, I really,
No,
really
I would just
appreciate this.
say that if you can read Sanskrit text. If not, read at least an Indian language version of it. If not, always have a reference with Sanskrit and be very careful about the which authors you are reading, because sometimes that also shapes what you take away from the text.
Yeah,
Also, when it comes to itihas, people write a lot of things, which is great from a literary perspective. Be very clear whether something is a retelling or
yeah,
they are talking about the itihas itself, right? Because the retellings are beautiful, but they are fiction. So having that clarity is usually important. Once we have that, we can enjoy everything for what it is. So that's it.
yeah. And
And
I would
thank you
just
for having me.
No, absolutely. And just on that point, I would just say, like, there's been many retellings, whether it's like Kambarama and Tulsi, Ramacharita. These are all retellings. Again, these are
Correct.
reimaginations of
Correct.
it. It's not the actual text of the Valmiki or Mahabharata. So if you want the original, go to the source, right? Or
Yeah,
as far back of the
absolutely.
source we can get to. No, but I mean,
Absolutely.
it's been a pleasure. I love bringing on anyone that knows anything about Mahabharata, and you know so much, and I really appreciate the time and the conversation, because it's a text that just keeps giving and doesn't know when to stop.
Absolutely. I'm so glad. And I love the conversation. It's almost been like an hour and 45 minutes. And I
Yeah,
think we can speak for another half an hour if time permits. So,
yeah,
no,
that's
thank you
right.
so much. Loved it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Just one sec. All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us on Mirror Media, and we'll catch you next time.
पुष्पसुगन्ध सुमलय समीरे पावन मुनिजन यमुना तीरे पावन मुनिजन यमुना तीरे गायति वनमाली वनवती